I'm Ferial Hafaji in Johannesburg.
Madeswa Giwasage in Abuja.
Hi, I'm Robert Kabshenga from a completely rained out Kampala.
And I am Charles Onyango Obo in Nairobi.
So, Robert, I saw some images from you which I couldn't believe. Cars floating in the street. What's happening?
Never mind cars floating in the streets, Furio. We're living like crocodiles in Kampala. My immediate neighbors are frogs, but life isn't the best right now. You know, the thing is, Kampala is a city of hills. It's a very hilly city. So what has happened is that over the years, all the hillsides have been built up and it's all concrete. So now, in terms of water delivery into the valley, where the roads are and the drainage systems, is completely overwhelmed by the volume. So the volume of water is flowing faster and higher than before, and the drainage system that drains into Lake Victoria just can't handle it. And then here it is. You can never make this up. Not even Nollywood can make this up. The drain that takes water into Lake Victoria has been parceled out to developers who have built warehouses and factories around it.
Oh my God! So what's going to happen? I mean, that's really dangerous.
Thankfully, I live on a hilltop, so I'm not bothered.
The bourgeoisie always have an escape plan. Eh? They live on the hilltop and leave the masses to suffer in the valley.
Bourgeoisie.
Go, Adesua, what do you say?
Oh, I was just going to say the only bourgeoisie that doesn't have an escape plan is in Lagos, because in Nigeria, in Lagos, they have built in Ikoyi. Essentially, Ikoyi is in like the swamps, and they've built on canals, and so Ikoyi floods, and you have a million dollar home, and your water is getting all the way up to here. It's really, Nigeria is always just different. We're just different.
So, but Robert, what's the Kampala city's response? I really am interested in how a city adapts.
Somehow we survive. There's just no administration. By the way, full disclosure, I applied for the job to run the city and I was knocked out at stage 1. I didn't realize they had a plan for it. So I will not comment anymore on that issue. So let's move on with our discussion.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, we will move on with our discussion then.
I saw myself like as Fashola, so that's why.
I think you'd have made a great mayor, but anyway.
The podcast would have suffered.
It would have. Seriously, you'd have been very busy. Yeah. So today, where I wanted to start us off is in the DRC, or actually I wanted to start us off in Qatar, in Doha, because last week I suddenly saw on X this image of the Qatar, of the Emir of Qatar, with the DRC head of state, Felix Tshisekedi, next to him, and on the other side, the Rwandan leader, Paul Kagame. And this made me really begin to think quite deeply about the role of the Middle East as a growing power in geopolitics. Okay, it doesn't look like those talks have yielded the ceasefire immediately, but every time I look, there are delegations heading off to either Qatar or to Riyadh to solve the world's intractable politics. It's been, guys, quite a week for the Eastern DRC. Angola pulling out yesterday, South Africa's former president Kgalema Motlanthe being included in the group of negotiators. I'd love us to chat about what you think is happening there in quite a big week, and also how you understand that, for me, quite iconic image of what happened in Doha last week. It shows a change in geopolitics that I found really interesting. Maybe I'm just behind times here.
Charles knows.
No, you're not. First, I think that you're right that as the saying go, we've seen the rise of the middle powers, as they call them, in in the Middle East. But the interesting thing is about just the very different approach that countries like Qatar, UAE, even Saudi Arabia brought to diplomacy. So, for example, with the Qatar meeting in which Kagame and Tshisekedi met Sheikh Al Thani, it was kept secret, and people knew it had happened only after. And that is because for the rest of us, if you see, it is very noisy. You have 100 people turning up as a delegation. If you see, for example, the Russia, Ukraine talks, and even others previously, it's so noisy. So,
Very.
yeah, they have changed the model. It is very, very quiet, but most notably, they have introduced a new pragmatism, and they have taken ideology out of it. So because that has been part of the problem, that a lot of these other processes, there's a lot of ideology, and they're a bit transactional, but they have taken that out of it. So it has allowed them to be fairly successful. And it's not just that. We saw, I think, the Saudis and the UAE in 2018, brokering that the rapprochement between Ethiopia and Eritrea. Kenya, we saw them, I think, 2021 doing the same thing, and I think this time it was Qatar, between Kenya and Somalia. So they actually have got a very good success record. And I think that whereas nothing special has come out of this one yet, apart from the agreement of an unconditional ceasefire, I think we might see some payoffs down the road in the next few days.
Charles, I don't think that nothing has come out of it. Actually, very interestingly, yesterday I saw a feed from the press secretary to President Museveni informing the public that there was going to be a virtual meeting of EAC and SADC as a follow-up to what had happened in Dar es Salaam. And I could only put it to the fact that a new momentum has probably been injected by the involvement of Qatar. And so, yes, I think even what Firio talked about earlier on, the bringing in of Halima Motlante, is to try and build on the momentum that the middle powers in the Middle East have brought in. But also, let us not forget one important factor, Charles, that we need to bring in this conversation, which is that the Middle Eastern powers are liquid. And currently, they are the only ones in the international money market with the liquidity that African countries are desperate for. So you see a lot of positioning of these African countries, knowing that, American money, Chinese money, European money is drying up. They are positioning to be sure that they are on the right side. I mean, we all know which side Uganda has taken in the conflict in the Sudan, and then they are on the side of UAE and Hemeti. So those considerations come into play at a time when these governments are in desperate need of cash to fund whatever systems or whatever processes that they have. So I think that Qatar, especially with its quiet type of diplomacy, we saw it in Syria as they work together with Turkey, might actually generate a momentum that African countries will be forced to build on.
That's really interesting. I was also looking at with interest at a video of Tshisekedi inviting in the Donald Trump administration to assist with peace talks. So that left me very confused. Adesua, how did you read it?
I mean, I'm not surprised he's inviting America, right? Because everybody wants a superpower as an ally, and particularly when I think there was an offer also made for the minerals in the DRC as
Yes.
some type of leverage there. And, it does seem that Trump wants minerals right now because he's trying to take Ukraine's minerals. So perhaps he thought that that was a good tactic to bring his eyes towards the DRC. Like, you want minerals? We have some. It's not just Ukraine that has what you need. But I mean, I'm more interested also in just the role the Middle East is going to be playing moving forward, particularly now that America is fighting a lot of its allies. We're seeing these traditional, powers kind of weakening. As you said, money drying up from Europe, money drying up from America. But we're also seeing like a change in geopolitics and how people approach things. The fact that America is so focused on Greenland is odd. It's the fact that they're at odds with Western Europe is very odd. And so African countries have to take advantage of that, but it seems that the Middle East is also poised to take advantage of this shift in geopolitics.
It's really inserting itself right in. And I was wondering, as you begin to walk us through ECOWAS versus the new alliance of Sahel states, do those Middle Eastern countries, or at least some of them, have any influence over the new alliance? And do you see them working in that area at all as well?
Well, if we're thinking about the alliance of Sahel states, I would say that the major influence we've seen is Russia. That's the biggest influence, that's the biggest player. And it's so I always draw back to a moment that I didn't realize would have such huge implications for West Africa. But it's when the head of the Wagner group was marching on Moscow, in that
Yes.
bizarre coup attempt, right? And I think, because the Wagner group was very active in West Africa, and particularly in the three countries that left the ECOWAS, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. Wagner had a huge presence in those countries. And we also have actually, so if we're thinking about Russia's influence in West Africa, we also have to think about what the Wagner Group was doing here, before that, era, and before the rebranding of Wagner. Now, this shift in geopolitics, also the weakening of Europe, is also how you see France being kicked out like an unwanted child from so many different African, nations.
Unwanted child or unwanted wife?
Well, like maybe an unwanted wife, like with her wrapper not even fully tied, like get out. Like that is how France is being tossed to the curb. And people are suddenly remembering the histories of like the Senegalese chevaliers and, the history of French exploitation of Francophone West Africa. But and you also see very importantly that Russia has invested in misinformation and disinformation campaigns in West Africa. I saw a report that said about 40% of the misinformation that we've seen coming out of Russia is in West Africa alone. That's a significant, you know.
And that's why I have a question for you on that. What is the strategic interest for Russia in the Sahel?
I I mean, if we're thinking about, I think there's two things. One, as a trading partner, Russia is now the biggest trading partner for West Africa, but I think the whole of Africa when it comes to wheat, and quite a few other things. In terms of resources, the sheer scale of the increase in trade between Russia and West African countries, particularly Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, you have significant increase in the scale. You have Russian weaponry, Russian expertise, and also we have resources, huge natural resources that are going towards Russia. And if because Nigeria has always kind of been some sort of firewall. If Nigeria is strong, the wall should hold. But Nigeria has been weakened and has weakened itself, particularly with I call it pump fake. I'm trying to think of a less Gen Z millennial word to explain what Tinubu did with the Niger crisis after the coup. Um,
Yeah,
when
we
a country,
we expected military action from Nigeria to reverse what had happened in Niger, and then the guys went quiet.
yes, because you have to consider in West Africa, the biggest tribes are the Hausa and Fulani. Significantly, there's 90 million Hausa and Fulani people in West Africa. Tribal sentiments play into the internal dynamics of every country, but as well as the regional issues we're seeing, particularly because you have Fulani who are nomadic people and you're having clashes over land. A huge factor also is the environment, is desertification. It's that the desert is spreading in the Sahel and land is not as good as it was before. So the fight for resources in terms of like land, where you have Fulani cattle herders versus like local farmers, is becoming more and more strained and more intense. When President Tinubu comes in as a southerner in Nigeria who is not Hausa or Fulani, understanding that Hausa and Fulani is the biggest tribe in Nigeria, and Nigeria is considered one tribe. In other countries, it's separated, right? So in Niger, Hausa is the majority. In Burkina Faso, Fulani is a significant minority, but in Nigeria, we combine it as one demographic. He came in as a southerner, and it seemed that both him and his team were not sensitive to the tribal elements of him deciding that I'm going to fight Niger. You had leaders in the north saying that those are our brothers. There's a lot of intermarriage between the Nigerian elite and the Nigerian elite, right? There's a lot of places where the borders are for us who sit down and look at it on a map, but do not exist for the people who live there, right? The borders are porous. It's basically non-existent in a lot of places. You have to think about the Kanem Borno Empire. This is 17th century, 16th century, where these people have considered
Oh,
themselves a one people for centuries. And so when you come and say, I'm going to send military up there, I'm cutting off your electricity, I'm going hard, a lot of, and this was very fresh into his, his presidency. A lot of Northerners just said no, and a lot of internal grumbling in the Nigerian military were like, we fight alongside the Nigerians to fight banditry and to fight terrorists, and now you're going to tell us we should go and fight them. A lot of them felt more loyal to the tribe or to the people than to the president, and it felt
wow.
yeah, and it also felt again short-sighted because you have to carrot and stick a situation, and you also have to understand change in geopolitics. Like if you understand that there might be Russian backing or there might be tribal elements, then I think you approach a situation differently, and you don't approach it like Obasanjo in the 80s or something, because you don't have the same power that he did, and you don't have the same regional relevance.
So one more question, and this is to both you, Adesua, and Charles, is how much did or what's the significance of the uranium deposits in Niger and the gold in Central African Republic? I don't know if other countries in West Africa do have gold, but how do those play in the Russian calculation? And to that, how much of the praise that we see for Ibrahim Traore of Burkina Faso is a Russian play? And and for Charles, I know you've done this before. Do you want to talk to us about how the geopolitical importance of the Sahel and the Middle Eastern countries that we're talking about earlier on, and now the entry of Russia, and then the whole Libyan situation? Just, I know I've made it worse, but I just thought we might as well. And
Oh,
this why you first.
okay, me first. I don't even know where to start. Do I start with uranium, gold, Traore,
Yeah,
with
Traore first.
resources? Okay, Traore first, because I was like, we even have gold in Nigeria. We have gold in Zamfara. And there's a rumor that there's a secret airport where planes land and take off and go straight to the UAE. With Zamfara gold. But let's
Wow.
Be a
leave that.
great story, eh?
Ah, no, it's, because let's not even, because the Minister of State for Defense, one of his aides were found with gold bars. There's a lot going on in Nigeria,
Whoa.
but we have gold. We have gold. Traore is a, he's like, it's so fun. It's not funny, But I think people have decided he's Thomas Sankara reborn. And so, like even today, I saw Nigerians posting, oh, Traore is giving every university student 100,000 CFA or something. And I think this is just an individual who made this up himself to insult like Nigeria's president, be like, oh, look at your mates. And so I think he's just become a character that one, it could have started as propaganda, but he's so fictionalized that people just use him as like a comparison point to their own leaders and just make things up.
A bit
Like
like
the
the Robert
situation,
Mugabe quote.
yeah, like the situation in Burkina Faso is really bad. I think conservative estimates say that he's lost at least 60% of the country's territory to jihadists and terrorists. And you have
Wow.
10% of the country is internally displaced. And because you have internally displaced people to that degree that go against this idea that he's a successful president, they're seen as an inconvenience. And I read an AP story where the AP could not even get commentary from anyone from the UN, from charity organizations about this over 2 million displaced people. You have a situation where like I think it's about 6 million people need aid to be able to survive on a daily basis. And if beyond this also, he's also committing or is accused of significant human rights um, violations. There's a human rights leader, I think his name is Diallo, Dauda Diallo, I believe. But, there's allegations that he was kidnapped and sent to the front lines to fight jihadists, and that this is what is happening to multiple people who work in charity organizations and or human rights organizations. You also have the fact that if you speak out against Burkina Faso in Mali, they can cut off your TV station. This is how these countries are working together. Like I believe there's a Malian TV station that's very popular, Jalibo or something, where somebody was speaking about the situation in Burkina Faso, and Malian authorities cut off their channel's signal.
Wow.
So, yeah, so we
So
have to think
it's a proper alliance
it's a
of
proper alliance.
strongmen.
It's a proper alliance, and it is
Of
also
autocrats.
yes, and it's a collaboration of for me, because people are like, oh no, they're leaving ECOWAS. What are we going to do? That's why Niger is begging Nigeria for petrol. Niger I think had the worst GDP per capita in the whole of ECOWAS. These are not like our strong countries. You have to
Mm.
consider that the coast of West Africa are the countries with the economic strength, right? The Ivory Coast, the
Ah.
Ghana, the Nigeria, the Sahel states are generally the weakest. And so, this idea that you lost your left, you didn't lose your left leg really. Like it's like you
Mhm.
you lost the finger you don't really use when you're typing. But it's true, and as in I think obviously they should come back, and we need to be one. But also, if you're thinking about like the economic significance, it is not. The issue is the security significance, because if the
Okay.
security situation keeps
Okay.
worsening in those states, it's going to affect us badly. That's why we
Okay.
have Lakurawa, that's a new terror sect coming down from Niger,
Mhm.
and we have
Can
yeah.
I Robert, I ask a question here? Is this, when Jacob Zuma was in power here,
Yeah.
Russian influence was really at its zenith then,
Mhm.
and obviously they were trying to do that huge nuclear deal. And
Yeah.
at the time, I remember going to Rosatom, which is their nuclear company, their headquarters in Johannesburg. And on the map, Adesua of Africa, there were lots. They were telling me what's the problem with South Africans, because across Africa we're building nuclear. And is it? I mean, are you seeing that kind of nuclear diplomacy in West Africa or not really?
I don't know. Charles, do you
No.
know? I don't know.
No, no, no. But I think it probably goes to the issue Robert says of the the uranium mines, because what we are basically seeing in Niger and Burkina Faso is kind of the forefront, a new kind of mineral nationalism, which is very interesting to contrast with what is happening in DRC, because DRC seems to be going in the opposite direction. But apart from the mineral nationalism, that they are the if you look in terms of the Sahel, the bigger threat as Deswa is the jihadist threat, because right now it is immediately Ivory Coast, of all places. This all of a sudden it has been flagged as likely to come under attack by the jihadists. Benin is now in the hairlines of the jihadists. As the Swaz said, they have 60% of the territory in Burkina Faso, which when Traore came to power, they had 40%. So you can see. So there is this fear that in the Sahel, we are going, if you exclude the brief period of the ICU in Somalia, we might have the first time several countries actually falling to the jihadists. And, there's a real possibility. And then you have the collapse or the threat to anchor countries like Ivory Coast. And, to the question, more specifically to the question Pharaoh raised, let me just give you an example. A while back, I was in the Central African Republic, where
Who goes to the Central African Republic? Charles, how do you get there?
I didn't want to ask.
So I mean, it was really strange,
Charles, that's crazy.
Seeing these presidential convoys with Wagner troops in bananas and all those kind of things. But here's the thing: at the airport, there is an exclusion zone at the Bangui Airport, which is a French exclusion zone. In other words, planes land and roll into that area, and it is under the jurisdiction of the French. And they roll out and fly, and and so people saying that that they fly out with minerals, some of it complete with the soil. Now, when I was there, just we drove through to the we came to the back from the back end of the airport, which is open, you can drive through. There was the Russians were building their exclusion zone. So you're going to have two exclusion zones, which are essentially outside the authority of the Central African Republic government. And it was thought that this was just around the grander scheme of Russia's kind of mineral enterprise, which has become very, very important for it, particularly now under Ukraine. But it's a crazy world. It is a crazy world. Most of I can't imagine, for example, in Entebbe or Oliver Tambo or JKA, that there is a corner of the airport which is owned by, I don't know, the British or something, and Kenyan authority doesn't extend there. Unthinkable. But it happens in Central African Republic.
But Charles, even further to the question that Firio raised and back to where Firio started us off, which is the Middle Eastern powers, I think that the Middle Eastern powers have worked out that the world economy is going to be driven largely by gold in the coming years. So the more they can stock up on gold, the more they sustain their economic power. So they are pouring large amounts of money into these jihadist groups. For instance, there's arguments that the guys who are fighting in the war in Khartoum on behalf of RSF are not even Sudanese. They come from across the Sahel, from different parts of the country. So these fighting groups are flowing back and forth. So I wouldn't be surprised if indeed the jihadists are actually being funded by many of these Middle Eastern powers and Russia, whose purpose is simply just extraction of these resources. Because the competition is about, even the war in Congo, it's about who can extract these minerals for the next technological round of development in the world.
But Pharaoh, you're asking the question. You should tell us what is the perspective in Southern Africa, because I think, like you said, probably as a player, South Africa, more than any of these other countries, plays the biggest in this mineral resource game across the continent. So what is the view in Southern Africa, and what is the big plan? What is the game plan? Because if even when we talk of political realignment, you have this very strange thing of Ramaphosa now can be a friend of Zelensky, and things like that. So what
Yes.
what's going on?
So, thank you, Charles. I just feel like we are completely reeling from these almost daily attacks from the US administration now, and the removal of like I said, the funding for the HIV/AIDS drugs, keeping us very domestically focused. Also, if we lose AGOA, that's a real risk. So the farming lobbies and also the automotive sectors exerting enormous pressure on South Africa to reach a rapprochement with the US. But in fact, the rump of political support in the ANC, which is still the largest party, but not the governing governing party any longer, would see it push more closely in the direction of those Middle Eastern countries with whom we have extremely good relationships. The ANC has very close ties with the UAE and with Qatar and with Saudi Arabia. So I think you're going to see those alliances come to the fore much, much more in the coming year. And then obviously with that is the race for critical minerals. That does pose the additional problem, is that our trade relationships on commodities are with the global north still. And now you're going to see that begin to shift. And it's probably the fight that you're beginning to see happening here this year.
Charles, I want to come in there because I was once told that South Africa sells 1.5 million goats to Saudi Arabia for their Hajj.
It does, eh?
Yeah, there you go. But the other
also
interesting.
I'll just tell you a little thing, if I may.
Yeah.
So the many of the I know that many of the sheikhs and the emirs, they have game reserves and massive holiday homes. And the other year it was a big thing because the guy brought his whole harem to the Eastern Cape, and we're not used to that, so it was quite a big story.
An airport or something to land on.
An airport. He revitalized the whole airport just for the.
So you're the ones who have complicated our investment drive, because one of our guys went to Qatar and offered tourism as an investment. The guy told him, find us 100,000 hectares where we can set up a game reserve and do, what is it called? Hunting tourism, and then we'll come.
Yes, hunting tourism is huge here. Huge.
But the point for me, staying in Southern Africa and minerals and contrasting with the failures that we see in the Sahel, is a country that many of us tend to ignore. It's a country called Namibia. It's in a little quiet corner. There's almost no reason for anyone to go to Namibia, either by transit or to go. But interestingly, Namibia is an example of a country in the world, or at least on the African continent, that functions. And I have been fascinated by it. Yesterday, their deputy prime minister said it is time for our minerals to work for the majority of the people in this country. And I was fascinated. How come Namibia works and the rest of us seemed so totally dysfunctional? I remember the photograph from a long time ago, about maybe 3-4 years ago, before COVID, when the then president Hage Geingob was photographed with a trolley in a supermarket doing his own shopping. And then when I raised it, somebody said, yeah, actually in Namibia, the president stops at the traffic lights And here it is completely unthinkable. The guy won't even stop in his own car park. So I've been thinking
Mhm.
that in terms of hopeful stories, what is it that why has Namibia worked? And Charles, I finally arrived at what I'm going to say, and it might shock you. I actually concluded that Sam Nujoma, the founding president of Namibia, was actually not a leftist or a revolutionary. It was just rhetoric. He's a guy who learned, yeah, Charles, this guy learned from the best years of Mugabe and what Botswana had done right, and the mistakes that the Marxists had made in both Angola and Mozambique, and was determined not to repeat them. So all he wanted was to see a country that worked. So he built, and also I think as a revolutionary movement, SWAPO was not involved in the kind of violent power contestations and intrigue that characterized the liberation movements. But very interestingly, Charles, when you look at the Central Committee, the political leadership of SWAPO, there was some of the finest African minds you could find. I mean, Haje Gaingob was working in New York as a senior guy in charge of some UN project. I can just look that up. He became president. The first foreign minister, Theo Ben Gurirab, was actually very well educated and was working in Zambia. The one we knew best was Hidipo Hamutenya. By the way, as an aside, the first female editor of a media house on the African continent was Gwen Lister.
Gwen Lister.
Yeah.
No, 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 no.
Yes. Yes, Charles. But my point is that
It was what's her name? She was this. She
Where?
was in in Tanzania
oh,
in during Nyerere's time. She was a South African.
yes, the Indian
Yeah,
lady.
yes,
What's her name?
Freni
French,
Ginwala.
yeah,
yes.
yeah,
Who was
French Ginwala.
very,
Okay,
very. She was a force of nature.
okay.
Mm.
But my point is that the political leadership that inherited Namibia was a very progressive political leadership.
Yeah.
And so they looked to actually develop their country, and also they were helped by the fact that they had a very small population. There were only 2.4 million people in 1990
Yes.
when the country was taken over. And so you can see that they were determined to make it work away from the glare. So two interesting stories, Firio and Adesua, that I'll tell you. There's a friend of mine who is into goat farming, going back to goats. So he so he goes to Namibia to look at to start on a study tour, and there is this goat farmer in the middle of the Kalahari Desert, who is, by the way, Namibia is the only country on the African continent, maybe with South Africa, that exports beef to the European market, and maybe Botswana. I think those are the only
Yes,
three.
yeah. Botswana also does. Yes.
They are the only ones authorized to export beef to the international market. The rest of us are just, we deal. But the point this guy made to me is that he was shocked that this farmer in a desert in Kalahari was growing his own livestock feed, grass, and able to feed goats and fatten them in 6 months and take them to the market faster than we could. So the second story is even funnier. There is a very prominent kingdom in Uganda called Buganda Kingdom. So one of those cultural institutions. So their king had been struggling with his health, so that his German doctors sent him to a lodge in Namibia to recuperate. So unfortunately, there was a diplomatic mishap, and his visa was due to expire before he could leave the country. So Ugandans went onto a social media campaign denigrating Namibia about how can they treat their cultural leader like that. The Namibians said, what nonsense is this that they told Ugandans Namibia is a sovereign and independent country and can make its own decisions. We continued our noise. Guess what they did? They asked that guy to leave their country, irrespective of his status in Uganda and the diplomatic implications that would happen. So you can see that, yeah, they are a country.
They have a firm sense of self, huh?
Absolutely. And I think also they were a bit lucky that they arrived very late to this independence game. And I think they had had time to study the mistakes that all the other African countries had made on the journey to nation building. So it is not surprising that they are the first real functional country in Africa to elect a woman as president. And then she is the only one with the sufficient self confidence to appoint a vice president who is a woman, reduce the cabinet, and toss out some of the men who thought they were very powerful. If I may add, she studied her tertiary education in the Soviet Union, whatever that says about her.
A great story.
Amazing.
But it's wonderful. There is. I mean, you talk of prudent. Yeah, I think you're right that perhaps Sam Nujoma was more centrist than leftist. But they also had this like South Africa. They had this willing, is it what is it, willing buyer, willing seller system for land reform, which of itself is very important, because if you see what South Africa and Namibia did, and Mugabe just sent veterans with clubs, machetes, and petrol bombs, but
Great side
and
confused, Robert.
yes, but I think it is because in an African context, particularly in liberation context, for you to choose that you will reform land through this willing buyer, willing seller format, it's courage.
Yeah.
Because the preference is usually for the radical option. But whereas you don't hear any noise at all about the land reform, and redistribution in Namibia, they have actually redistributed 20% of the white-owned land.
Yeah.
So, Farrell and her comrades have only the money to redistribute 10%.
And so badly in 30 years with so much money and so little, and now it's a big problem.
But the interesting thing that, like we're saying earlier with the Middle East person, they have done this without any noise. In fact, if you ask most people if there is a major land redistribution program in Namibia, most people will never have heard about it. So I think you're right that there's a lot of very prudent governance
but
that
Charles,
has been at play.
They also achieved. Sorry, go on, Adesua.
Oh, no, I was just thinking about what you said, with Namibia having a female president, female vice president. I think 9 out of 14 ministers are women. I was just thinking about the situation in Nigeria, in very depressed, ways because of what happened yesterday with Obi Ezekwesili, she got very high at the World Bank, and you see how a senator is saying, I'm higher on the social stratification than you. Young, he's not even that young, but they'll call him young. I think he's in his 40s. She's obviously older. This is a woman who's achieved a lot on the international stage, and a senator is saying, I'm bigger than you, and keep quiet, right? But you see Nigerian women also. You see Amina Mohammed at the UN. You see Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala. You see Nigerian women achieve great heights in other places, and then we can't even have a woman governor yet. So I think I was just thinking
but
about
you see
what you said.
No, but Adesua, there is an explanation for that, and in the liberation movements, and one day we shall talk about the liberation politics. In the liberation politics of Africa, women tended to they proved themselves as equal partners in the struggle. I mean, whether you look at self-confident women like Graça Machel, we were talking earlier on about Frenegin Wala. If you look even at Winnie Mandela, they took their place, and we have a few in Uganda, our own, who took their place in the struggles against dictatorship, and so in that sense there is a cultural respect for women. And I think that the level of self-confidence in Namibia is so high that when the president died in office, Hage Geingob died in office, his vice president, who was a man, his first statement was to say, I am not offering myself for election. Because at that time, SWAPO was in the process of choosing its successor. So what he did was he then appointed the flag bearer of SWAPO as his vice president in order to finish Hage Geingoob's term. If you contrast that with Malawi, when Joyce Banda was vice president, Bingu Mutalika, died in office, and his brother tried to pretend that he was still alive and tried to hijack the presidency for himself. So we really need to look to Namibia. And Charles, just one final point for me. One of the interesting things that Namibia and Nuyoma did, as soon as they arrived in office, they retired all the senior commanders who had been in the military and gave each one of them a fantastic retirement package before they got used to state privileges. And so they sent those guys home, gave them a fantastic mansion and a pension for life, and made sure the guys were well taken care of, and then started to build a new security apparatus from the ground up. But I think the other one thing is we tend to celebrate Southern Africa, or South Africa rather, as the rainbow nation and Mandela having integrated the white community. But we don't look so much to what Nuyoma did with the settler community, or what I would call the Germans and the South Africans that remained in Namibia. He never alienated them. And I think that's a good case study on integrating. And so you bring the strong culture that the settlers, or what I would call the Germans and the South Africans, had in terms of doing work, and you integrate it with the willingness of the Africans to play ball. And you have a success story that I think in Africa we need to be proud of as a country that works. And it reminds us that actually, really, this continent does work if its leaders decide to work for the people as a way of bringing benefit to themselves. It's when you have the Tshisekedi type of leaders, Tinubu and all those characters, that you then start to get a problem. I mean, Firio, you know about Zuma, but we shall not go there.
The striking thing is that, in February, the 140th anniversary of the Berlin Conference passed.
Mhm.
And there was not a single commemorative event in Africa, which is that, we don't have to celebrate, we have to mourn it. And my own view is that it's striking that doesn't happen because, if you go back, this bunch of, Europeans meet in a room without Africans, and only 2 of them had ever set foot in Africa.
Which one?
And it was, Stanley. Stanley and Pierre Dabraza, the guy who founded Brazil, Brazzaville.
Brazzaville, yeah.
So they divided up this continent. But the thing from that is that from an African point of view, I sense that we are very uncomfortable with the Berlin Conference because there is this question of, we have studied the impact of colonialism, how did it happen, but Africans are still afraid to discuss why did we lose. Because, you can talk this thing, but the reality is that we lost.
Yes.
And
because we didn't study geography.
My own view is that if we don't confront that question, we'll never deal with issues of our sovereignty.
Charles, I have an answer for you. It's in a song by Hugh Masekela called Witch Doctor.
You want to sing it, or
So that and also goes to the question of the scholarship, because I'll give you an example. Just seeing the link from there. If in the Battle of Omdurman, I think this was 1890, the British fought with the local Sudanese. The British had 48 casualties. The Sudanese lost 11,000 soldiers. 11,000.
Wow.
And it was all down to technology.
The Maxim gun.
The British had the superior guns. And
Maxim
why
gun.
is this important? My own view is that until Africa addresses the question of science and its own autonomous technology platform, the way China has, we are not going to crack the development game. We will always play second fiddle. And so that's why I am thinking that there is a real need for us to look again at what happened in the colonial period, what 1885 means, and what we can learn from it to build strength. And let us have, please, some anniversary event at which these reflections come through.
Excellent parting shot,
will-
Adesua.
Oh, my parting shot for today. This has been very difficult to choose because I don't want to leave us on a negative note. So I decided that my parting shot is that Nigeria has decided to bail out our Nigerian brothers and sisters with truckloads of petrol flying across the border. Now, the thing is,
how much money is Dangote making?
I don't know. Dangote and NNPC are fighting again. I don't know what they're doing. Dangote said he's sending fuel. The Dangote NNPC, I was going to say palaver, but the Dangote NNPC troubles will continue till somebody gives up. But in terms of Niger, I want to say that this is very interesting because when we ended fuel subsidy, part of the reason why is because there was this belief or common knowledge is that we were subsidizing fuel for our neighboring countries, particularly, Niger, Benin, Cameroon, because our fuel consumption was way more higher than it was supposed to be. And so when we ended this fuel subsidy that was, weakening the naira and draining our economy, it also means we stopped subsidizing fuel for Niger. And so, they did come and ask us for a bailout, and Nigeria, as a good big bro, helped.
Thank you.
Thank you. Robert.
Mine has to be a fellow that has always fascinated me. Lieutenant General Ian Khama, former president of Botswana. I mean, this video popped up of him at the age of 72 doing military exercises that only 20-year-olds are known to do. He really put to shame these other African generals who are walking around with massive pot bellies and purporting to be commanding armies, and they're way much younger than him. And they're way much younger than him. I just looked at him and I said, this is where Africans need to be. Yeah.
Inspiration. Okay, my parting shot flows from Charles's about the 140th anniversary of the Berlin Conference. I was aghast to read in the Financial Times that the US and Israel had sent negotiators to Somaliland and other countries in the Horn to begin to tell them, instruct them, that they would become the new home for Gazans. This is neocolonialism of a stripe that we have to say no to.
It's not neocolonialism, it's colonialism, period.
Yes, actually.
Yes, and on that note, to our listeners, thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this show, please remember to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel and follow our social media pages. And we'll see you next week. And bad natives, go and do what you do best.
It's always great hanging out with you guys. I never want this to end, but we gotta go. See you guys.
It's so lovely. Thank you.
Yeah.